Hey, welcome back. Eric Levenhagen here. And today we're talking again with Dr. Tom Chwe from Florida, an optometrist in Florida, business owner. You might remember we had him on a while back talking to him about workplace culture, and it was a topic he was very passionate about. And he is so gracious to come back today and talk to us a bit more about another business that he's involved with and something that, again, he's passionate about, something you're not going to hear too much discussed, and we're going to find out why here in just a bit about clinical research. So, Tom, thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come back and talk with me here. It's great to
Thank
have
you
you
for
back.
having me back.
Yeah, you
Glad to be
bet.
here.
You bet. So, tell us a little bit about this whole idea of clinical research, and I want you to start us off with like how you got involved with it.
Yeah. So, what brought me to Florida is I was planning on acquiring a practice, which I'm still kind of working through right now. And I was talking to an old friend of mine, a colleague actually, that I used to work with in Arkansas, who is a clinical research coordinator. She wanted to get back into ophthalmology because she worked at the same ophthalmology clinic as I had. And so I asked her if she would join me in this venture down here in Florida. So then we started talking about clinical research because that's what she does. And she asked if I'd be interested in incorporating that into the practice. So then I started kind of learning more about the clinical research industry and trying to learn everything. I even attended a conference last year to learn more about it. And then we got the ball rolling. And during this acquisition process, I was working a little bit in that clinic as well. And so we got everything set up, all the paperwork process done, reaching out to sponsors, which are companies that provide the research. And so we have some things lined up for Q1, so this quarter, and we're looking into this spring and summer. And so then I got to thinking, hey, this is a really cool concept. I started looking into why this is not widely done. We started this process in the summer. And so now we are helping clinics incorporate clinical research into their practice because it is a very lucrative thing to add to your practice. There's a lot of practices that are doing dry eye, offering dry eye services, doing myopia management, specialty contact lenses. And there are a lot of experts talking about that and talking about how to incorporate it into your practice. But oftentimes we don't see many people talk about how to incorporate clinical research into a practice, which can be very lucrative. So I started the company with that former colleague of mine, and we're now helping incorporate clinical research into private practices.
Okay. All right. So, why do you think it's not talked about that much? You mentioned that you started to look into that, right? Why do you think it's not as widespread as some of the other like specialties that we hear about?
That's a great question. I think that it's intimidating if you think about it. Clinical research, I was intimidated. I wasn't interested at all at the beginning because I had a misconception about it, which I'm
Hmm.
sure a lot of other doctors do as well. So there's things that have to be qualified in order to be able to do this. Where do I even start? This is only for people in academia. How am I supposed to do this? And thinking about all the administrative paperwork involved and even just managing a trial and how does that even work? I don't think people start to look into it because they think about all this work involved and all the hoops they got to jump through to be able to do it.
Okay. All right. Let's flip that around for a second. What is the benefit to a private practice? Obviously, there's some sort of benefit or compensation structure involved here. So why don't you get into that a little bit and see why does somebody want to get interested in clinical research?
That's a great question. There are obvious financial benefits of incorporating clinical research into a practice directly and indirectly. What I mean by directly is you get compensated by the sponsors for implementing clinical research and for running the trial. But there's also indirect benefits. And these are things like listing on your website that you do clinical research and what that does for the public's perception when they see that you're doing clinical research in your practice. They think that you're keeping up with the latest advancements in research and new treatments, technology. And so it adds to the credibility. And so it helps with marketing. And also, it's very rewarding to be involved in cutting edge treatments and technology. And so there's a rewarding aspect of it, leading to a more fulfilled career, both like for you and for your team because of The clinical research can also be fun. And a lot of people find that they don't mind cutting back on their schedule seeing patients because this is a little bit different. Each clinical trial runs differently. It changes things up in a way where it makes their career more exciting as well. So there's both financial and non-financial benefits, but it helps them both directly and indirectly.
Okay. All right. That's great. So when we talk about clinical research in the eye care industry, can you give us some, I don't know if we want to get into necessarily examples, but just the current state of clinical research in the eye care industry, what it looks like, what it entails, that sort of thing. The big one is this, what do you want to say, more in demand? Is it in a high demand? Meaning, do these companies who are the sponsors, are they having trouble finding enough researchers to do the work?
That's a great question. First of all, the clinical research industry, I looked up the stats before this interview. It's a $60 billion industry right now in the no, sorry, $60 billion industry worldwide. Almost $30 billion of it is in the US alone. So there's a lot of money flowing through this. Sponsors are currently seeking out new sites for research. And it's a great idea. It's actually very good for them to seek out not only new sites, but also the sites at private practices. You can open up a center to do just research alone, but then recruiting patients becomes a big challenge. So a lot of these sponsors are looking at private practices because you already have the patient base. You already have a group of patients who have dry eyes. You already have a group of patients who have glaucoma. So it's really easy in terms of enrollment. So private practices are in high demand. Newer sites is starting to be looked at more. Previously, they didn't, a lot of sponsors wanted to work with experienced sites and the sites that are currently doing it. But now there are more companies and more sponsors out there trying to get their product approved. And so going with more experienced sites has some disadvantages. The advantages are that they're experienced, they know what they're doing, they have their ducks in a row. It's less hand holding because of that. There's less training. The disadvantage is then we have competitive enrollment now. You already have a dry eye study. Your patients are tied up doing that dry eye study, but then there's another company interested in doing a dry eye study as well. How are you going to get more patients enrolled when they're already tied up in one study? Also, if there's two dry eye studies and you're having to decide, okay, so I have this one patient, which study am I going to put them in? So we want to make things fair and we want to do things with that. When you have to decide between two different studies and enrolling a patient into either one of those, then that takes the randomization out of it, right?
Sure.
There could be a little bit of a bias towards putting a patient in one study versus the other. So because of these things, they're looking at newer sites.
Okay.
And so I encourage everybody to think about clinical research and incorporating them into their practice.
I know this probably varies greatly by a number of factors, meaning who the sponsor is and what the study is, probably among a lot of other things. But just give me, if I'm a private practice optometry owner sitting here listening to this right now, and I'm going to start thinking about this, what are some of the factors that I should be considering? Is there a general time commitment? Is this going to take a lot of extra time? Is it going to, like, how do I know that I'm right for even going down this path to spend my time looking into it?
Mm-hmm. I think it does require some time to look into it and to learn about it. It's just like how if you're going to incorporate a new technology to treat dry eyes into your practice, you want to learn about the product. You want to learn how am I going to get my team on board to communicate this with patients? What are our protocols going to look like with this? There's a whole planning process behind incorporating new services into your practice. And so this is just like incorporating another service into a practice. So you have to strategize around how are we going to fit this in? How are we going to train our staff? What is our schedule going to look like? How much time do we have devoted to this? So the best thing to do, I think a lot of sponsors, there are some sponsors that are willing to work with new sites and help guide them along the process and give them guidance as to what to do. They have enough patience to do that. But then there are other sponsors that really don't have the time and the resources to help them with it. And so the best thing to do is to reach out to these companies, these sponsors, and just try to get to the person that's involved in the decision making process and in terms of the clinical development department. I think if you talk to them, you will get a sense of whether they can guide you in the process or not.
Very good. Are there places out there that people go to like where do I even where does one even start to look? Like maybe
Yeah,
people know that, but I don't. Like where do folks start to look for these sponsors? Is there any type of database or posting service? You know what I mean? Where's the info at?
great question. So this is not, it's not common knowledge, by the way.
Okay.
I actually attended a conference in the spring last year. It's
Okay.
ACRP, and ACRP, it's the, oh gosh. Okay. So it stands for the, I'm being put on the spot, Association of Clinical Research Professionals. And
Yeah.
so it was a really good conference. They offered a course called Clinical Research 101 for those getting started in the process, whether you are the principal investigator or you are the doctor that's seeing patients, or whether you're a clinical research coordinator that's managing the study. It was a good training program, a full day course. And so I attended that. And then I stuck around for the rest of the conference as well. And I learned a lot just by attending the classes. They have a lot of classes that talk about clinical research and the trends today, the problems. Just by listening to that, I learned a whole bunch. I will tell you, there's a lot of abbreviations in this industry. So my head started spinning. Like there's CRC, there's IRB, there's all these abbreviations that I had to learn. That was probably the most tricky thing for me at the beginning to wrap my head around. But so there's ACRP. I think the FDA.org website has a lot of resources as well. And then there's also an organization similar to ACRP called SOCRA, which stands for the Society of Clinical Research Associates. And they're also a fantastic resource as well. They're more on the education side of it. And so there's a lot of great resources online for self-learning that you can sign up for as well, which you should, because this is completely different than anything we've been taught, even in school. I don't know if they teach that nowadays, but we sure did not get any education on this back when I went to school. So
I'm going to presume, but maybe you correct me if I'm wrong. If you're an optometrist in private practice right now, do you already have the skill set for most of these or a good number of these studies that are going on? Is it something that you can
absolutely.
pull off and pretty easily?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
So this is very similar to doing a regular exam. Let's say it's a study that involves a pharmaceutical product. And so you're doing a full exam on the patient at the beginning and you're documenting it. Now, the sponsor or may have certain protocols in place. Like they're like, I know you typically don't do this as part of your exam, but if you can gather this data for me so we can get this information. So you may have to change things up a little bit, but they give you the directions on what to do. And so it's an exam with some extra components, and then it's the whole documenting. So we already do that in our day-to-day practice, right? So it's doing an exam, but with a twist. The biggest challenge is to making sure, I guess the biggest difference is to make sure that we follow all the rules. And what I mean by that is the pharmaceutical product that we're testing, is it stored properly? What are we doing with the investigational product is what they call it. Do we have proper protocols in place for when adverse events happen? Do we know how to report those? What do we do to ensure enrollment success? And so there's the enrollment process. So there are a lot of things that are different, but in terms of the basic skill sets, we have that. Like
Okay.
every optometrist is equipped to be able to do clinical research.
Okay. All right. Very good. So it seems okay. This may be something that's has a lot of variables to it as well. But when we're stacking up, so what I've gathered from this is we have the skill set. It carries a lot of benefits that are non-financial, but also it sounds like there's a bit of time involved to get some processes laid out, learn about the research and the projects that you may be involved in, and then setting up procedures to follow rules surround that. So there is, and then actually conducting the study or doing the exams. So there is a fair amount of time invested into this thing for an owner or for any optometrist out there. So if I'm looking at, again, if I'm the owner of my practice and I'm looking at doing this versus one of the other specialty services, like how do I start to decide which way I want to go? Meaning, a lot of times, in addition to, okay, look, I'm the numbers guy, right? I'm the finance guy. So I'm going to be interested in the money side as well as all the other parts. But the things that we're looking at with our clients, when they're going to bring on a specialty service, presuming that we've already checked all the boxes of, is there a ready market for this? And are you really passionate about this myopia management or dry eye treatments or whatever the specialty is that they're wanting to get into? So we're checking those kind of qualitative boxes. And then we get down into the brass tacks and the numbers to say, what are you going to need in terms of time and equipment? Because that all has a cost. And then what is the actual return on that investment? Is there any sort of like even a range of either dollar figure? Like, how do you quantify what the financial benefit is going to be for doing this?
Remember that this is a sort of a financial related podcast. So this is a topic that's very exciting for me too. Okay, let's talk about the finances. Let's talk about how this is different than just regular practice and seeing patients.
Okay.
So on average, when you're doing a exam on a patient, okay, let's say we're comparing, okay, you're doing an exam, you're billing Medicare for a comprehensive exam that you just did. And so let's say we were to bill, I don't know, 99213, a level 3 code, E&M code for that visit. Oftentimes what you'll see when when the study reimburses you, okay, they reimburse the doctor or the principal investigator about 1.5 times, sometimes up to 2 times Medicare allowable. Okay. So for the same amount of time, they reimburse more than what Medicare reimburses. Now, here's a big difference too. When you see this patient, what Medicare pays you for is for your services of seeing the patient, but then you think about the time spent with your billing team to bill that out. You think about the time spent of the paperwork, the charting that needed to be done after you see the patient or while you see the patient. You think about the personnel that you have to pay, the staff you have to pay for this. The great thing about clinical research is that the sponsor pays you for time spent outside of seeing the patient. So there's billable hours involved. So you did 2 hours of paperwork for the study, you bill the sponsor for the 2 hours of work you put into it. That's on top of the reimbursement you get for seeing the patient. So then on top of that, you get reimbursed for the time spent around it. If one of your staff members had to do some of the paperwork or if they had to do data entry, even the data entry part of it, that time is billable and you get paid for that. You get paid for the expenses, that the overhead expenses that were used to conduct that study. Okay.
Oh,
And you get paid for that. You get paid like a good amount at the very beginning as startup fees as well,
okay.
before as the trial gets underway or it becomes activated, so to speak. These are things that Medicare alone, if you're just to do a regular exam, they don't pay for any of those extra hours that you put in outside of seeing the patient.
Sure.
And so really like they pay you for the time that you had to put in to do this.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. So you're getting you're getting, if you're utilizing other staff and then your time, all of that is billable and so covered. You're getting paid for that at a hopefully a billable rate that exceeds the costs of that, right? Or at least for your staff. And then you said there's an overhead allocation. Did I hear that right? An overhead allocation? If I'm seeing them in my office and I've got a rent factor, there's some type of reimbursement for
Yep. They
the
call it
fixed costs?
fringe, like a fringe something. I forget what it's called, but yep. So that's all
Okay.
bundled in and that's negotiated at the beginning. So there's a contract and you negotiate certain items, can contract an organization to negotiate on their behalf. And so you really have to be savvy at negotiating a good pay for the study because their job is to cut down their expenses.
Sure.
But your job is you are needed for their study. And your job is to make sure you're appropriately compensated for your time.
Got it.
So there's that. Another cool thing is that there can be studies where if you don't have a certain piece of equipment required for their study, if you don't have a corneal topographer, for example, a lot of times they will get you that device used because they need to collect that data. They're like, we need to have serial topographies over time to see how their corneas look when we're testing out this contact lens, this new contact lens. And so if you don't have one, they'll send it to you. There are practices that actually start using that for their regular patient care, and then they bill that without having had without the monthly expenses to own that device. And now I think that some sponsors have figured out a way to prevent that from happening, but there are products that you could use for that. And then when you're done with the study, some sponsors will sell it to you for a very low rate. Like I heard somewhere between 10 to 20% of like the fair market value if you want to keep it, because they have no use for it afterwards. So they're trying to get rid of it. So like it's a really good deal for the practice to get new equipment. If you're lucky, sometimes they'll just give it to you at the very end of the study. There are those benefits of getting new toys being part of the study as well.
Sure. Very cool. So look, Tom, I know, man, this time seems to fly right by. I know we're covering a lot, but I want to be respectful of your time and everybody else's here. We covered a lot. It sounds like there's a ton of great benefits to this, integrating clinical research into your own practice. What would you say? What's the next step? What kind of advice would you give to anybody out there who's either maybe still feeling, man, this is a lot, there's still an overwhelm factor to this, or they're just not quite sure if they could do it or if they want to do it? What are the first steps to getting this figuring out if this is the right path for you?
That's a great question. So I would reach out to those that are already incorporating clinical research in their practices. I know a bunch of them. If you want to reach out to me, I can give you some kind of like references, or I can point you in the direction of someone who's already doing it. So you get to hear from their experiences firsthand and what their thoughts are on that. Also, the associations that I talked about, the ACRP, SOCRA, and checking out the FDA website for more information is very helpful as well. Certainly, I'm a good resources a good resource to reach out to as well. You can reach me on LinkedIn. Actually, I prepared a one-page checklist for those that want to start incorporating it into their practice, and so trying to figure out a way to get it out. But I think the easiest way is just to add me on LinkedIn, DM me with the word research, and then I will get you that one-page checklist to get your site ready for clinical research. And yeah, so those are the best ways to get started.
So, Tom, thank you so much. You're always a wealth of knowledge, and glad to talk to you always. So hopefully we'll get to chat again sometime soon. But thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You bet.